Altered Reality, an expansion I created for Control. Warning, this may contain spoilers to the story, so watch with caution. In this new expansion, we play as Dylan Faden, trapped by the hiss in a comatose state. Jesse's words of, "I hope he wakes soon," swirls in darkness inside of him, and suddenly he jolts from his hospital bed, which sits up upon a red pyramid surrounded by darkness. So it's right here, start tutorial. Suddenly, elevated hiss appear and start attacking Dylan. Having the same ability as Jesse, Dylan kills the hiss and a platform walkway appears leading to a bright door. Right here. Dylan wakes up and startled in bed, which he appears to be his containment room. Watching for a brief moment as the scientist rushes out of the room to check on an alarm that has gone off. When Dylan walks out of the room, he finds himself in an open area that resembles a high school cafeteria, and the other possible directors P1 through 5 rooms circle around the edge. Guards notice Dylan as he walks out and suddenly turn to his troopers that attack. After defeating the troopers, Dylan goes to the security office to turn off the alarm. Looking behind him, Dylan sees two doors, one darkened, it's this door over here, and the other one with a kind of glass center lock to it. Observing the room, there is a prism in a glass case and two large prisms in the cafeteria, making a small light puzzle to enter the door. Going through, there's a small office with some narrative content. Then down the hallway, Dylan comes to the scrapbooking department, a room with a giant pyramid erupting from the center. But as Dylan walks towards it, it becomes translucent as he walks through. The room itself is open, but suddenly it collapses inward with a lot of stone blocks to leave only a thin path to the room at the end of the hall. In this room sits Jesse at the director's desk, with the circular embodiment of Polaris floating next to it. Jesse tells you, or Dylan, of the new object of power, the Speedmaster watch, which is ticking, and what is causing Dylan's eternal slumber. It must be stopped, for it is corrupted by the hiss. It is through searching his past that Dylan can remove the hiss that remains inside of him. Jesse's voice suddenly changes to that of Emily Pope's as Dylan realizes he is sitting back in his P6 containment with Pope interviewing him. Dylan lashes out in anger. Pope encourages him to go out for a glass of water. Walking back into the cafeteria, low-level hiss greet them again. When Dylan defeats the hiss, he goes back to the security office, but the other door is now activated with the glass lock, and new pillars are surrounding the area. Walking through this new door, an overlay of trench appears, explaining the new object of power, the burnt buffalo nickel, which allows the user to flip it in their hands to travel to Shadowvale, a realm that is removed from the current time, and it slows the world around you. Entering a room, Dylan finds the nickel spinning continuously in a chrome singing bowl and picks it up, gaining his new time abilities. The next room serves as a little test room to practice his new powers. The path leads back to the scrapbook department, but this time facing a different direction, with the whole room clear of impending blocks like before. New hiss enemies appear, called the hiss verb, which surrounds other hiss by with continuously moving matter like a force field that only can be penetrated if Dylan uses the buffalo nickel to go into the shadow veil. By going into the shadow veil, he slows down the whirlwind that the verb covers the hiss with, and by attacking it, they both die. Once the hiss are cleared, a resonance like Polaris appears in the center. Dylan walks up to it. It introduces itself as Sigma Octantis, but it only has enough strength to open the first doorway in Dylan's journey. Disappearing inside Dylan's persona, a doorway appears in the direction of the room Jesse and Polaris were in earlier. As Dylan walks through the doorway, he suddenly is walking out of his old home, trailing behind a young version of Jesse and his former self. Dylan starts recollecting their journey to the dump, but finds their current route unfamiliar to what they actually took. His start appearing in the open world, and it turns into a protecting mission where Dylan has to protect the young Jesse and Dylan from the hiss attacks they are unaware of. These attacks die off as the three enter the dump, and the older Dylan narrates what happens as the two do perform the actions. That Jesse was the one that removed the slide projector and turned it on, and it was her that left him and ran away. Dylan watches as troopers of the FBC take his younger self away in a van. Hopping on top, Dylan rides the van through a secret path that leads back to the FBC. Before entering the building, Dylan is knocked off the top of the van by an elevated hiss and finds himself just outside the building. Searching around it, Dylan finds the back door that is locked with another prism puzzle. This time, Dylan rotates entire buildings in the city skyline to get the light to align with the door and open it. Going inside the building, so here is the traveling through the dump with the green areas being safe, and then slowly more and more hiss enter. And then he is knocked, travels to the building. Down here, we have the prism puzzle. This is the back door. So he turns the prism puzzle, opens the door, enters this way. Walking through the office, Dylan see things more become disjointed, and past this wall, hiss start to appear. Two large hiss warped are there in front of the door to the basement. Even after defeating them, more hiss pour in and surround Dylan. Dylan wakes up in a cold sweat back in his containment room, frustrated at his inability to progress further in his timeline. Quiet singing is heard through the open door of his room, a soft, playful humming. The boy and girl, P4 and P5, are sitting on the ground near their rooms, playing with some toys and dolls. P4 is excited that Dylan is finally awake and asks him how his journey has been. P5 also tries to say something congratulatory, but her speech is all jumbled. Dylan talks about his struggles and questions why Jesse has left him in this state. P5 says, "Our dreams tend to scramble our reality. Like, did you notice the elevator over there? It may help in getting to where you want to go." An elevator appears near them. Taking the elevator to the top, Dylan finds himself near the offices of Emily, Pope, and Darling. The path to Darling's office is blocked off, but going to Pope's, his start attacking him until he reaches the central office and gets a key card to the Edison wax cylinder object of power containment. Walking out of Pope's office, Dylan isn't standing on the Pope's side anymore, but on Darling's side. If Dylan were to re enter the office, it would be Darling's with the projector of him explaining the cylinder, but in reverse. If Dylan exited the Darling office, it would bring him back to Pope's side. After going through the keycard locked door, Dylan comes upon the wax cylinder object of power. On the right, there seems to be a door, but instead of opening when Dylan walks to it, it closes upon him. Dylan turns around and steps down a long hallway filled with many pictures and videos that seem to be reversed and warped. Hiss start attacking Dylan as he reaches the research office leading to the object of power. Entering this kind of projector-like room, Hiss starts showing on the screen and attacking, with the incantations that the Hiss say being played backwards. After defeating this boss area, Dylan inquires the objects of power's ability to rewind things and make them move forward. Leaving the containment area, he passes by an office explaining the power's properties, then uses his new powers on the door that is closing when it should be opened. The narrative objects and clips that Dylan has picked up along the way are also playing the correct way. The reversed door leads down a hallway and turns into a cutscene where Dylan sees Trench play the corrupted Hiss slide in the slide projector. Trench turns around and notices Dylan. Dylan, caught off guard, runs the opposite way down the hallway. But the hallway darkens and Dylan wakes up back in his containment room. More singing and mumbling is heard through the empty cafeteria. It's P4 and P5 again, but this time they're playing in the security office. Dylan asks what they are doing there, and P4 explains that their time there was always worthless. They are merely there for Dylan's survival. Dylan asks how does he leave. P5 responds in her backwards voice. Using the wax cylinder on P5, Dylan understands that he must create his own slide using the prisms in front of him. By making a square in the prism puzzle, a large hallway opens up in the middle of the cafeteria. Walking down through it, Dylan grabs the slide at the end. Exiting the hallway, Dylan appears in front of the large pyramid in the scrapbook department, and the slide projector is standing in front of him. Placing the slide in, the projector solidifies the pyramid into a hole. When Dylan runs up to the pyramid, Trench appears behind him and fires at Dylan, knocking over the projector. Projector topples forward while playing, and Dylan falls into the picture. Falls into the slide projector hole. While falling, Dylan is bombarded with his own consciousness, telling him how he was the one who started the projector. It was him that had caused his own fate. If Dylan was the one that caused his own problems, however, he can be the one to create his own solution. Realizing this fact, Dylan lands suddenly on top of the pyramid. Disjointed edges of the side float around in large blocks, with Hiss attacking Dylan from all angles. Traversing through the blocks, Dylan reaches a large section where Darling appears, but Hiss have encapsulated him as he becomes one large Hiss covered in Hiss verb. Defeating Darling leads up to Dylan's biggest challenge, Trench, who uses the many forms of the gun on him and Hiss corrupted versions of Dylan and Jesse attack. When the final battle is over, a doorway opens at the back, leading up to a room with the Speedmaster clicking above the singing bowl. Placing the buffalo nickel in the singing bowl and spinning it, the Speedmaster slows. Using the power of the wax cylinder, Dylan rewinds the time on the watch face, and visions of his past swirl around. Dylan wakes up in his bed, but this time it's on a hospital bed. Jesse rushes into the room exclaiming, "You're awake!" Dylan replies in a raspy voice, "I'm sorry." The two hug, and the game ends.